Welcome to the Courage Habit, where we train to act despite fear. What exactly is courage, and why is cultivating it more important now?
That's right, Alex. Just a quick heads up before we get started. While we're diving into mental habits and wellness, keep in mind this is for educational purposes and isn't medical or professional mental health advice. If you're struggling, it's always a good idea to chat with a qualified professional.
Great point, Lisa. It's all about building that foundation. We often think of courage as this grand, heroic act, charging into battle or saving the day. But courage shows up in much smaller, everyday ways. And frankly, most of us feel like we're just stuck, held back by fear.
And that's the core idea. Courage isn't the absence of fear. If you don't feel fear, you're not pushing your boundaries. True courage is what you do when you do feel that fear. It's the action taken in the presence of fear. Think of it as a muscle. You have to train it.
A muscle we often feel is weak, or maybe even atrophied. I know I've had moments where I've wanted to try something new, speak up, or take a different path, but that voice of doubt, that knot in my stomach, just screamed, nope, too risky. You'll fail. And so I didn't.
That's a perfectly relatable experience, and it's precisely what we aim to address. So, let's start by dispelling a common myth. Many believe courageous people are fearless. They are not. They simply have a different relationship with fear. They don't let fear dictate their actions. They understand fear, they acknowledge it, and then they move forward anyway.
So it's not about magically eliminating fear, but about learning to coexist with it and still choose to act.
Precisely. And this is crucial in today's world. We're bombarded with information, with possibilities, and also with potential risks and challenges. Whether it's in our careers, our relationships, or our personal growth, there are always opportunities to step forward or to retreat into the familiar. Building a consistent habit of courage equips us to navigate this complex landscape with greater resilience and purpose.
And this audiobook promises a practical, actionable framework for developing that habit. It's not just about understanding the theory.
Absolutely not. We're going to break down the process into manageable steps. We'll explore the anatomy of fear, understand its different forms, and then build practical strategies to confront it. We'll talk about redefining bravery, looking beyond the simplistic myth of the heroic figure. You might be surprised at how often vulnerability becomes a source of strength, not weakness.
Vulnerability as strength. That's a powerful idea to explore. It feels counterintuitive to many of us who have been taught to hide our perceived weaknesses.
It does, doesn't it? But think about it. When you admit you're scared, when you acknowledge you don't have all the answers, you connect with others on a deeper level. You invite collaboration and support. It's a form of courage in itself to be open and authentic. We'll also delve into the art of dealing with rejection, that inevitable part of trying anything new. Facing a no with grace and resilience is a vital courage skill.
I can already see how this is going to be more than just a philosophical discussion. You mentioned expanding our horizons and challenging our comfort zones. What does that look like in practice?
It looks like taking intentional, often small, steps outside of what feels safe and routine. We'll introduce the concept of the exposure hierarchy, a roadmap for gradually increasing your comfort with situations that currently trigger fear. We'll also highlight the power of the tiny step. Courage isn't always about giant leaps. Often, it's about incredibly small, consistent actions that build momentum.
So, we're not going to be told to wrestle a bear on day one.
Definitely not. We'll focus on micro-courage, those bite-sized bravery moments that make a significant difference over time. We'll also look inward, exploring the critical role of our inner dialogue. How we speak to ourselves before, during, and after a challenging situation can either empower us or completely derail us. Mastering courageous self-talk is a fundamental building block.
That makes so much sense. It's like our internal cheerleader versus our internal critic. And learning to amplify the cheerleader seems key.
Exactly. And from there, we'll cultivate an action bias, the courage to simply start, rather than getting bogged down in analysis paralysis. We'll draw inspiration from stories of everyday bravery, showing you that courage isn't reserved for a select few. It's woven into the fabric of human experience, and you, too, possess it.
I'm already feeling more motivated. But what happens when we inevitably stumble? Because I imagine there will be setbacks.
That's a fantastic point. Overcoming obstacles and navigating those plateaus is a critical part of developing any habit, especially courage. We'll provide strategies for bouncing back, for learning from what feels like failure, and for keeping the momentum going. We'll also explore the ripple effect of courage, how acting bravely in your own life can positively impact your relationships and your community.
That's a beautiful thought, that by working on ourselves, we can create positive change around us. So by the end of this audiobook, what are we aiming for?
Our ultimate goal is to help you sustain the habit of courage, making it as automatic as possible. We want you to reach a place where acting despite fear isn't a monumental effort, but a natural response. We're building towards a future where you can live more fearlessly and therefore more fully. It's about unlocking your potential and living a life that feels authentic and empowering.
So, to recap for our listeners, we've introduced the core idea that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the action taken in the presence of fear. We've discussed how this series will equip you with practical, actionable steps to build this courage muscle. We'll look at confronting fear through gradual exposure, the power of small steps, embracing vulnerability, handling rejection, mastering self-talk, and overcoming obstacles. All of this is designed to help us build a sustainable habit of courage, leading to a more empowered and fulfilling life.
That's a perfect summary, Alex. This journey is about empowering you to take on challenges, to embrace opportunities, and to live a life less defined by hesitation and more by bold, intentional action. Ready to start building your courage habit?
I'm more than ready.
Next episode, Unpacking Fear, the anatomy of I can't.
Welcome back. Last time, we ignited the spark of courage. Now, let's tackle the other side of that coin. Today, we're unpacking fear, the anatomy of that nagging voice that whispers, I can't.
That's right, Alex. For many of us, that I can't is a powerful barrier. It's the shadow that follows every brave intention. Understanding why we feel fear is the absolute first step to managing it and hopefully moving past it.
Exactly. So, let's explore the biology and psychology of it. When we perceive a threat, even a perceived one, our body has a very immediate, very powerful reaction. It's often called the fight or flight response.
I've heard of that. It's like our body's internal alarm system going off, right?
Precisely. And at the center of this alarm system is a small, almond-shaped part of our brain called the amygdala, often referred to as the brain's fear center. When the amygdala detects a potential danger, it sends out alarm signals. It triggers the release of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol.
Adrenaline, that explains why, when I'm really nervous about something, my heart starts pounding and I feel shaky.
That's the adrenaline in action. It prepares your body for immediate action, to either confront the danger, fight it, or to run away, to flee. Your heart rate increases to pump blood faster. Your breathing quickens to get more oxygen to your muscles, and your senses can become heightened. It's a survival mechanism, honed over millions of years of evolution.
It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. If our ancestors didn't have that quick fear response when they saw a predator, they might not have survived long enough to pass on their genes. Fear, in its most basic form, is protective.
Absolutely. And that protection mechanism is still incredibly useful when we face genuine, life-threatening dangers. However, in our modern lives, our amygdala can sometimes get a little overzealous. It can misinterpret situations as threats when they aren't actually dangerous in a physical sense.
So it's like the alarm system is set to high sensitivity all the time. It goes off for a barking dog, a missed email, or the thought of public speaking when there's no saber-toothed tiger in sight.
That's a great way to put it, Lisa. Our learned behaviors and past experiences also play a huge role in how we perceive threats and generate fear. If you had a negative experience with public speaking, for instance, your amygdala might associate that activity with danger, even if the current situation is perfectly safe. This is called a learned fear response.
So, the same situation could trigger intense fear in one person and mild unease in another, depending on their past experiences and how sensitive their internal alarm system is.
Exactly. And this is where we start to see the anatomy of I can't. It's not just a spontaneous feeling. It's a complex interplay between our biology, our past experiences, and how we interpret the present moment. Think of it as a three-part system: the biological alarm, the learned associations, and our current interpretation.
That's a really helpful way to break it down. It's like a feedback loop. The alarm sounds, we remember a bad experience, and our mind tells us, this is dangerous, you can't do it.
Precisely. And this loop can become incredibly strong if we repeatedly feed it. When we avoid situations that trigger that fear, we reinforce the idea that the situation is dangerous and that we can't handle it. Avoidance becomes a habit, and that habit strengthens the I can't voice.
It's a tricky cycle because avoidance feels like it's helping in the short term. It gets rid of the uncomfortable feelings. But in the long run, it just entrenches the fear deeper.
It does. And that's why understanding this anatomy of fear is so crucial on our journey to building courage. We need to identify our personal fear triggers. What are the specific situations, thoughts, or stimuli that tend to set off our amygdala and that I can't voice?
So, for listeners, this might mean taking a moment to reflect. When you find yourself saying, I can't, or feeling overwhelmed by fear, try to pinpoint what exactly triggered it. Was it a specific thought? A memory? A physical sensation?
Yes, journaling can be a fantastic tool here. Write down the situation, your feelings, your thoughts, and any physical sensations. Over time, you'll start to see patterns. You'll begin to recognize your personal fear triggers.
And you mentioned that modern life can amplify our anxieties. How so?
Well, beyond the direct threats our ancestors faced, modern society bombards us with information. Social media, news cycles, comparisons with others. It can all create a sense of constant inadequacy or danger. We're exposed to more potential threats, real or imagined, than ever before. Furthermore, many of the things we fear today aren't immediate physical dangers. They're social fears: fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. These are very real to our amygdala, even if they don't involve a physical threat.
That makes sense. The pressure to present a perfect life online, for example, can create a deep fear of vulnerability, a fear that if people see the real, imperfect you, you'll be rejected.
Exactly. So, we've talked about the biological alarm system, the amygdala. We've discussed learned fear responses and how past experiences shape our present reactions. And we've touched on how our interpretation of events, amplified by modern life, contributes to this fear. It's a complex system, but by dissecting it, we begin to demystify it.
And if fear is a signal, like you said, then understanding its source helps us understand the message it's trying to send. It's not necessarily an enemy to be silenced, but a signal to be understood.
That's the fundamental shift we're aiming for. Fear isn't necessarily a sign that you shouldn't do something. It's a signal that something feels challenging or potentially risky to your system. And the key is learning to understand that signal without letting it dictate your actions.
So, to recap what we've covered today, we've unpacked fear by looking at its biological roots, including the amygdala's role and the fight or flight response. We've explored how learned behaviors and past experiences create a powerful feedback loop that can amplify fear. And we've recognized that identifying our personal fear triggers is a critical step in managing our reactions. Understanding the why behind our I can't voices is the first step to silencing them.
Precisely. The topic for our next discussion is the fear spectrum, from butterflies to paralysis.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. Last time, we unpacked the anatomy of fear and explored why our minds often tell us, I can't. Now, we're diving deep into the vast landscape of our emotional experiences. Today, we're exploring the fear spectrum, from the flutter of butterflies in your stomach to the complete paralysis that can grip us.
That's right, Alex. It's so important to understand that fear isn't one size fits all. We've all felt it, but it shows up in so many different ways. Sometimes it's a gentle nudge, and other times it's a brick wall.
Exactly. Think about a professional athlete, say a gymnast preparing for a complex routine. They might feel butterflies, that nervous energy before they compete. That's a sign their body is getting ready, that they're about to do something challenging. It's a form of excitement mixed with apprehension.
And that's on one end of the spectrum, right? That's the butterflies feeling. It's noticeable, maybe a bit uncomfortable, but it doesn't stop them from performing.
Precisely. Now, imagine that same gymnast facing a skill they've never mastered or one they've had a bad fall on. The physiological response might be much stronger. Their heart rate could skyrocket. Their palms might sweat profusely. They might feel a knot in their stomach, and their thoughts could become racing and negative. This is a more intense level of fear.
So, you're saying the same person can experience different levels of fear depending on the situation?
Absolutely. And it's not just about intensity, it's also about how we react. At the milder end of the fear spectrum, we can often push through. We might feel that apprehension, but we can still function, we can still act. We can acknowledge the fear and say, okay, I feel this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
That's the kind of courage we've been talking about, the willingness to act despite feeling fear. But what happens when fear gets heavier?
That's when we move towards the other end of the spectrum. This is where fear can become debilitating. Imagine someone with a severe phobia, like arachnophobia, encountering a spider. Their response might be an overwhelming urge to flee, to freeze, or even to panic. Their rational mind can shut down, and their body goes into full self-preservation mode. This is closer to paralysis.
It sounds like the difference is in the body's response and our ability to think clearly. Research shows that different levels of threat trigger different parts of our nervous system. That initial flutter might be a mild activation of the sympathetic nervous system, preparing us for action. But extreme fear can trigger a more primitive, defensive response, almost like our brain is saying, danger, run or freeze.
That's a great way to put it, Lisa. And understanding this spectrum is crucial for building our courage habit, because the strategies you use to manage butterflies are very different from the strategies you'd use to manage paralysis. Trying to just be brave when you're in a state of panic isn't helpful.
So, the first step is self-awareness. We need to be able to identify where our fear is landing on the spectrum. Are we feeling a mild concern, moderate anxiety, or outright terror?
Exactly. Let's break down this fear spectrum a bit more. On one end, you have mild apprehension. Think of it as a gentle warning sign. It might be a slight unease before a new social event or a bit of nervousness before a presentation. You notice it, but it's manageable.
And on the other end, we have that debilitating fear, the one that makes it impossible to move or think. This is where the urge to avoid becomes incredibly powerful.
Right? Now, in between, you have moderate to high anxiety. This is where you might experience more physical symptoms, rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, muscle tension, perhaps some intrusive thoughts. You might still be able to function, but it takes a significant effort. Sometimes, this level of fear can make us doubt ourselves intensely.
It's like being stuck in a fog. You know you need to move forward, but the path is unclear and the fear is weighing you down.
And that's a perfect analogy. The fog obscures your vision, making it hard to see the steps ahead. This is where we might also experience a strong desire to avoid the situation altogether. The discomfort is simply too great.
So, to recap, we have three main zones on the fear spectrum. First, mild apprehension, the butterflies, easily manageable. Second, significant anxiety, noticeable physical and mental symptoms, requiring effort to proceed. And third, debilitating fear, where paralysis or overwhelming avoidance takes over, often shutting down rational thought.
Precisely. And recognizing where you fall is the first step in choosing the right tool from your courage toolkit. If you're feeling butterflies, a simple acknowledging phrase might be enough. But if you're feeling paralyzed, you'll need a more robust strategy.
This makes so much sense. I think we tend to lump all types of fear together and expect a single solution. But understanding the spectrum helps us tailor our approach. It validates that sometimes fear is a serious barrier, not just a minor inconvenience.
And it sets us up beautifully for our next steps. Because once we can identify where we are on the spectrum, we can start to build our ladder one step at a time.
So, today we've explored the fear spectrum from mild apprehension like butterflies to moderate anxiety with physical symptoms, all the way to debilitating fear that can cause paralysis or an overwhelming urge to avoid. Alex used the analogy of a gymnast to illustrate these varying responses, and I shared how research highlights different physiological reactions depending on the perceived threat. Understanding where your fear falls is key to applying the right courage strategies.
Next episode, Building Your Ladder, the Exposure Hierarchy. Welcome back to The Courage Habit. Last time, we dove deep into the anatomy of fear. Now, it's time to build our ladder.
Our ladder, Alex? That sounds like a plan.
Exactly, Lisa. Because the core of building courage isn't about magically eliminating fear. It's about learning to act despite it. And the most effective way to do that is through a concept called the exposure hierarchy.
I might have heard the term, but I'm fuzzy on the details. What exactly is an exposure hierarchy?
Think of it like this. Imagine you have a huge, daunting mountain to climb. You wouldn't just plop yourself at the base and expect to reach the summit in one go, right? That would be overwhelming, terrifying, and probably impossible. Instead, you'd break the climb down into smaller, manageable stages. You'd find easier paths, perhaps reaching a small hill first, then a moderate incline, and gradually work your way up.
Okay, I'm picturing that. So the exposure hierarchy is like a step-by-step plan for facing our fears?
Precisely. It's a structured list of situations or activities related to your fear, ranked from least to most anxiety-provoking. We start with the things that give you just a tiny flutter of unease and slowly, intentionally, move our way up to the situations that trigger more intense fear. The goal is to gradually desensitize yourself to the fear response.
Desensitize. That's an important word. So, it's about repeatedly exposing yourself to the feared situation in small doses until it doesn't feel as scary anymore.
You've got it. It's a systematic process. Let's say someone has a fear of public speaking. Instead of just throwing them in front of a huge audience, we'd create a hierarchy.
I'd love to see an example.
Absolutely. For public speaking, a very low anxiety step might be simply thinking about giving a speech, just letting the idea enter your mind.
And how would that feel? Probably not too bad.
Exactly. Then, a slightly higher step might be writing down a few opening sentences for a hypothetical speech, maybe just for 1 minute. After that, we could move to imagining themselves speaking those sentences aloud, but only in their own home with no one else around.
So we're building up the intensity very gradually. What comes after imagining it privately?
Perhaps reading those same sentences aloud to a mirror. Then, reading them to a single, trusted friend or family member. Each step is slightly more challenging than the last, but crucially, still within the range of what the person feels they can manage, even if it's a bit uncomfortable.
I see. So, for each step, you'd practice it until the anxiety associated with it decreases significantly before moving on to the next one.
That's the key to making this work. It's not about rushing. It's about mastery at each level. We practice until the anxiety response for that specific step becomes mild, almost background noise. Then, and only then, do we progress to the next rungs on our ladder. So, after speaking to a trusted friend, maybe it's practicing a short presentation in front of two friends, then in front of a small group, perhaps in a familiar setting like a living room.
And eventually, the top of the ladder might be giving a presentation to a larger room of people or even a work meeting.
Exactly. And what we're doing psychologically is retraining your brain. Your brain has learned to associate that situation with danger. By repeatedly facing it in a safe, controlled way, you're teaching your brain that, hey, this situation isn't actually life-threatening. I can handle this. It starts to lower that alarm bell. We call this habituation.
Habituation. So, the fear response itself starts to diminish over time with repeated, safe exposure.
Yes, and this isn't just for grand fears like public speaking. This applies to almost any fear. Maybe it's a fear of dogs. The hierarchy might start with looking at pictures of dogs, then watching videos of dogs, then being in the same room as a calm dog at a distance, then being closer, then petting a calm dog, and so on.
It really does sound like building a ladder. You're not trying to leap across the entire height. You're placing one foot in front of the other, deliberately and safely.
And each step you successfully complete is a victory. These small victories are incredibly powerful. They build confidence and reinforce the idea that you can face your fears. This is where the habit and the courage habit really starts to form, through consistent, small, courageous actions.
So, to recap what we've discussed about the exposure hierarchy, it's a structured plan for facing fears by breaking them down into manageable steps. We start with the least anxiety-provoking situations and gradually move towards more challenging ones, practicing each step until the fear response decreases before moving on.
You've nailed it. And the psychological principle at play is habituation. Your brain learns that the feared situation isn't as dangerous as it perceived, leading to a reduced fear response.
This approach makes confronting fear feel much less overwhelming. It feels achievable.
That's the goal. It transforms a seemingly insurmountable obstacle into a series of achievable challenges. This structured, gradual approach is the foundation for building lasting courage. It shows us that bravery isn't an innate trait. It's a skill we can learn and practice, one step at a time.
And it's so important that we don't skip steps, right? The temptation might be to go too fast.
Absolutely. Patience and consistency are crucial. Trying to jump too far ahead can be counterproductive and even reinforce the fear. We want to celebrate each step, acknowledge the discomfort, and then move forward with the knowledge that we've successfully navigated that level.
It's like building a muscle. You don't start with the heaviest weights. You build up to them.
A perfect analogy. The next episode will explore how even the smallest of these steps, what we can call micro courage, can have a profound impact.
I'm looking forward to that. The power of the tiny step, micro courage in action.
That's right. Thanks for listening. Welcome back. Last time we delved into the exposure hierarchy, that structured way of facing our fears. Now, we're exploring micro courage.
Micro courage. I love that term. It sounds so much more approachable than some of the grand, heroic acts we often associate with bravery. So, Alex, what exactly is microcourage?
It's about those incredibly small, intentional actions we take despite feeling a flicker of fear or hesitation. Think about it, Lisa. We've learned to break down big fears into manageable steps, right? Micro courage is about taking those first, almost imperceptible, brave steps. It's not about conquering a dragon. It's about choosing to speak up when you might normally stay silent in a small group or asking for clarification instead of pretending you understood.
So, it's about recognizing that tiny voice that says, maybe I should, and actually nodding to it, even if it feels a little uncomfortable. It's the willingness to nudge yourself just a millimeter outside your comfort zone.
Exactly. And the cumulative effect of these tiny steps is profound. Each small act of courage is like a mini workout for your bravery muscle. You might not see a visible change after one push up, but if you do a few every day, you build strength. Similarly, consistently taking these tiny steps builds momentum and confidence.
That makes so much sense. It's like building a habit, isn't it? We're not asking people to suddenly write a novel if they're afraid of writing, but maybe to write one sentence. Or if they're afraid of public speaking, perhaps it's just making eye contact with one person while they're speaking in a small meeting.
Precisely. Let me share a personal example. For years, I struggled with being assertive, especially in casual social settings. I'd often let others decide where we went for dinner or what activity we did, even if it wasn't my first choice. It wasn't a huge fear, but there was a definite hesitation to voice my own preference. My micro courage step was simply to suggest an alternative, even if it was a small one.
And can you tell us about the impact of that?
At first, it felt awkward. My heart would beat a little faster. But I started small. Instead of saying nothing, I'd say, that sounds good, but I was also thinking about the place down the street. They have great mention of food item. It was a gentle suggestion, not a demand. Over time, these tiny suggestions became easier. They didn't always get picked, and that was okay. The important thing was that I was practicing voicing my preference.
And what happened as you continued with this?
What I noticed was that the hesitation lessened. And then I started feeling more confident to make slightly more direct suggestions. Eventually, I found myself comfortable saying, I'd actually really like to try a specific place tonight if everyone's up for it. This wasn't a dramatic overnight transformation. It was the result of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of tiny, brave choices to speak up.
That's a fantastic illustration. It highlights how courage isn't always about facing down a terrifying monster. It's often about navigating these subtle social dynamics or personal preferences with a touch more assertiveness than we might normally allow ourselves. And you mentioned the neurological benefits of these small wins. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. When you successfully take a small, brave step, your brain releases dopamine. This is a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, reward, and motivation. It's like your brain giving you a little pat on the back saying, good job. That felt good. Let's do more of that. These small dopamine hits reinforce the behavior. They create a positive feedback loop.
So, each tiny act of courage is, in a way, teaching your brain that acting despite fear can lead to a positive outcome. It's rewiring your neural pathways.
Exactly. And this is where it connects back to the exposure hierarchy. The exposure hierarchy gives us the framework for identifying those steps. Micro courage is the action within that framework. It's the commitment to taking the very first, smallest item on your ladder, or even just a fraction of it.
It sounds like an incredibly practical application of the principles we've been discussing. For our listeners, how can they identify opportunities for microcourage in their daily lives?
Start by paying attention to those moments of hesitation. When do you feel that slight tightening in your chest, or that urge to stay quiet or avoid something? It could be in conversations, at work, at home, even in mundane tasks. For example, if you're ordering coffee and you usually just point, could you try saying the name of the drink instead? If you're in a meeting and you have a thought but hesitate to share it, could you try to formulate just one part of that thought and offer it?
So, It's about becoming more mindful of our internal reactions and then intentionally choosing a slightly braver response. It's not about perfection, it's about practice.
Precisely. It's about embracing imperfection. This isn't about ego or being the loudest person in the room. It's about aligning your actions with your values and desires, even when it's a little uncomfortable. Think about it. If every day you take one tiny step that feels a little bit brave, what does that look like over a week? A month? A year? That's significant growth.
It certainly is. It's like planting a garden. You don't expect a full bloom overnight. You start with a single seed, you water it, you tend to it. And over time, with consistent small efforts, something beautiful grows.
That's a perfect analogy. And these micro acts of courage prevent you from getting overwhelmed. When we think about tackling big fears, it can be paralyzing. But when we focus on just the next tiny step, it feels achievable. This cultivates a sense of agency. You realize, I can do this because you've just done something small and brave.
And I imagine this also helps to combat procrastination, which is often fueled by fear of failure or perfectionism.
Absolutely. Procrastination is often fear's camouflage. By taking a tiny step, you break the inertia. You create movement, and movement often dissipates fear. Remember that feeling of accomplishment after finishing a small task you've been putting off? That's the reward of micro courage in action. It's about recognizing that progress, not perfection, is the goal.
So, to recap what we've covered, microcourage is about taking small, intentional actions despite feelings of hesitation or fear. It's about consistent practice, like a workout for your bravery muscle. These tiny steps build momentum, boost confidence, and even provide neurological rewards through dopamine release. They help us overcome procrastination and gently expand our comfort zones.
You've explained it perfectly, Lisa. It's about understanding that courage isn't a single grand gesture, but a collection of many small, brave choices made throughout our day. These are the building blocks for larger bravery and ultimately for a more courageous life. It's about finding those everyday opportunities to choose action over avoidance, even when the action is minuscule.
Next episode, redefining bravery itself, looking beyond the traditional heroic myths to understand what true bravery really means in our modern lives.
Welcome back to the Courage Habit. Last time, we explored the power of tiny steps and micro courage to move us forward, even when facing big fears. Today, we're going to tackle something really important, redefining bravery itself. We're going to look beyond the traditional, often intimidating, heroic myth and uncover what real bravery looks like in our everyday lives.
That's right, Alex. When we hear the word bravery, our minds often jump to images of knights in shining armor, or maybe daring athletes, or even historical figures who faced down immense dangers. These are powerful stories, but they can also make us feel like true bravery is something reserved for extraordinary people or for moments of extreme crisis.
Exactly. And that's a myth we really need to unpack. The idea that brave people are fearless is just not true. If someone isn't afraid, then acting boldly isn't really a choice, is it? It's just their default setting. True bravery, the kind we're talking about here, and the kind that builds a habit, is about acknowledging fear and choosing to act anyway. It's about that internal dialogue where you might be trembling, but you decide to take the step.
So, it's not about the absence of fear, but about the presence of action despite fear. Could you give us an example of what that might look like in a less dramatic, more everyday scenario?
Absolutely. Think about someone who has to give a presentation at work. They might feel their palms sweating, their heart racing, that knot in their stomach. That fear is real. But the brave person is the one who, feeling all of that, still stands up, walks to the podium, and delivers their message. They're not fearless. They're acting with fear.
I see. And it's the effort, the internal struggle, and the commitment to the task that makes it brave, not the lack of those uncomfortable feelings. We often see this as quiet courage, too, don't we? The parent who, despite being exhausted and overwhelmed, keeps going for their children. The student who continues studying even when they feel they're not smart enough. The person who reaches out to a friend they've fallen out with, even though they're terrified of being rejected.
Those are perfect examples. Societal narratives often set these incredibly high, almost unattainable expectations for what courage looks like. We're bombarded with images of the spectacular hero, the grand gesture. This can inadvertently make us feel inadequate if our own courageous acts are quieter, more personal, or even involve stumbling a bit. But every single one of those micro courage moments we talked about last time, that's bravery. Asking a question in class when you're afraid of sounding silly? Brave. Trying a new recipe, even if you might mess it up? Brave.
It sounds like we're reframing bravery from this huge, monolithic thing into something much more accessible. It's a choice, a skill, and a practice that can be woven into our daily lives. It's about intentionality.
Precisely. And when we understand bravery this way, we start to see it in ourselves and in others much more readily. It's easy to dismiss our own small victories over fear because they don't come with fanfares or medals. But they are the building blocks. They are the training ground. We're training our brains to associate action with a sense of accomplishment, even when fear is present.
What are some of the dangers of clinging to this heroic myth of bravery?
Well, the biggest danger is that it paralyzes us. If we believe we have to be fearless to be brave, then when fear inevitably arises, we'll tell ourselves, I'm not brave enough, and we won't act. It creates an all-or-nothing mindset. You're either a superhero or you're a coward. There's no room for the complex, messy reality of being human, where fear is a natural part of experiencing new things or facing challenges.
And that can lead to missed opportunities, right? We might avoid taking a chance on a new job, starting a business, or even just speaking up for what we believe in because we don't feel that overwhelming surge of fearlessness that the myth suggests is required.
Absolutely. It also diminishes the incredible courage shown by everyday people in their everyday lives. Think about someone managing a chronic illness, a single parent juggling multiple jobs, or a frontline worker dealing with immense pressure. Their sustained effort, their ability to keep going when it's incredibly difficult, is the epitome of bravery. Yet it's often overlooked because it doesn't fit the dramatic cinematic mold.
So, how can listeners start to actively redefine bravery for themselves? How can they move away from that heroic ideal and embrace their own, perhaps quieter, forms of courage?
The first step is awareness. Start noticing when you feel fear and then notice what you do. Did you still send that email? Did you still have that difficult conversation? Did you still go for that walk, even though you were anxious? These are your brave moments. Give yourself credit for them. Don't dismiss them because they weren't epic.
It's about self-recognition and self-compassion then. Acknowledging that feeling fear is normal and acting despite it is powerful.
Exactly. It's about shifting your internal narrative. Instead of saying, I can't do this because I'm afraid, try, I'm afraid, and I'm going to do it anyway. Reframe your own past actions through this lens. Think back to challenges you've overcome. You likely felt fear then too, but you pushed through. That was bravery.
This is so helpful, Alex. It takes the pressure off this idea of needing to be some kind of fearless warrior. It makes bravery feel attainable and applicable to everyone. It's about the will to act, the conscious decision to move forward even when your instinct is to retreat.
And remember what we've been building towards. These small, deliberate acts of courage, performed consistently, train the courage habit. They build your confidence muscles. Each time you act despite fear, you're sending a message to your brain that you are capable, that you are resilient, and that you can handle discomfort. This is precisely how we move beyond the myth and into a practical, sustainable form of bravery.
So, to recap, We've learned that true bravery isn't the absence of fear, but the action taken in its presence. The heroic myth of the fearless individual can be paralyzing, setting unrealistic standards. Instead, we should recognize and celebrate everyday acts of courage, the quiet courage, as the true drivers of personal growth and resilience. By becoming aware of our own brave actions, no matter how small, and reframing our internal narrative, we can begin to cultivate a more accessible and sustainable habit of bravery in our lives.
That's a perfect summary, Lisa. It's about redefining bravery not as a rare heroic feat, but as a fundamental human capacity that we can all develop and exercise daily. Happy learning! Welcome back, everyone. Last time, we explored the myth of bravery as a heroic, fearless act. Today, we're diving into vulnerability.
That's right, Alex. And I think many of us hear vulnerability and immediately think of weakness, of being exposed, of feeling unsafe. It's like we're being asked to stand naked in a crowded room.
Exactly. That's the common perception, isn't it? We've been taught to protect ourselves, to put up walls, to present a polished, in-control version of ourselves to the world. But what if I told you that embracing vulnerability is actually where true strength lies? That it's one of the most courageous things we can do?
I'm ready to be convinced. Because and I suspect many of our listeners, have spent a lot of energy trying to hide our imperfections, our uncertainties, our fears. We tiptoe around the edges of being seen because we're afraid of what might happen if people see the real, messy us. In fact, we touched on this fear of being seen earlier.
And that's precisely the connection. When we try to shield ourselves from vulnerability, we're actually building more walls between ourselves and the world, and more importantly, between ourselves and our own potential. Think about it. If you're constantly on guard, trying to be perfect, how much energy does that take? How much does that free you up to actually do things, to take risks, to grow?
That's a great point. It sounds exhausting, and it probably leaves us feeling more isolated, even when we're surrounded by people. Because genuine connection can't happen when we're not truly showing up.
Precisely. Breen Brown, a researcher who has done groundbreaking work in this area, defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It's not about oversharing or being weak. It's about having the courage to show up and be seen, even when you can't control the outcome. It's about saying, this is me, imperfections and all, and I'm willing to be seen.
So, it's not about not feeling fear, but about acting despite the fear of being judged or rejected.
You've got it. And this is where it becomes a powerful tool for courage. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we invite authentic connection. We build deeper relationships. We become more resilient because we learn that we can survive the risk, that even if things don't go perfectly, we're still okay.
That research you mentioned on resilience and vulnerability, what did it show?
It consistently shows that people who embrace vulnerability are more resilient. They bounce back faster from setbacks. Why? Because they understand that failure or imperfection isn't the end of the world. They've already taken the courageous step of exposing themselves, and they've learned to navigate the emotional fallout. When you're willing to be seen as imperfect, you're less afraid of things going wrong because you've already faced your deepest fear, being less than perfect.
So, by embracing imperfection, we actually become less susceptible to the fear of failure? That's a fascinating paradox.
It is, and it reframes our understanding of courage. We often think of courage as charging in a battle or performing an incredible feat, but in our daily lives, courage often looks like being honest when it's difficult, asking for help, admitting we don't know something, or trying something new even though we might fail. These are all acts of vulnerability.
I like the idea of micro courage applying here. These small acts of being vulnerable are like those tiny steps that build up our confidence to tackle bigger challenges.
Absolutely. And when we hide our imperfections, when we strive for a false sense of perfection, we're essentially creating a fragile facade. What happens to a facade when it's challenged? It cracks. But when we build our strength on the foundation of vulnerability, we're building something much more durable. We're building authenticity.
So, how do we start doing this? How do we begin to embrace our imperfections when it feels so ingrained to hide them?
It starts with self-awareness. Notice when you're going into protection mode, when you're editing yourself, when you're afraid of saying the wrong thing or appearing less than capable. Ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen if I'm a little imperfect here? And then take a breath and try showing up just a little bit more authentically.
Maybe it means admitting you're nervous before a presentation instead of pretending you're completely at ease, or sharing a real struggle with a friend rather than just saying, I'm fine.
Exactly. Those are acts of courage, and they build upon something we've talked about before. Remember when we discussed building a ladder of exposure? Embracing vulnerability is like adding a new rung to that ladder. Each time you choose to be seen, to be imperfect, you expand your capacity for courage. You become more comfortable with the inherent risks of living a full life.
And it opens up possibilities, doesn't it? When you're not constantly trying to be perfect, you're more open to new experiences, to learning, to making mistakes and learning from them. You're more open to what life can throw at you.
That's the beautiful output of embracing vulnerability. It frees us. It allows us to be more present, more engaged, and more connected with ourselves and others. It's the foundation for true bravery, the kind that isn't about being fearless, but about being willing to be fully human.
So, to recap for our listeners, we've explored how vulnerability, often seen as weakness, is actually a powerful source of strength and courage. It involves embracing uncertainty and emotional exposure, and it's key to building resilience and authentic connection. By showing up imperfectly, we become less afraid of failure and more open to growth and genuine experiences.
A crucial takeaway is that hiding our imperfections creates a fragile facade, while embracing them builds a more durable foundation for courage. The path forward involved increasing self-awareness about our protective behaviors and choosing to show up more authentically, even in small ways. These acts of courage, these moments of vulnerability, are what truly allow us to live more fully.
This reframes that fear of being seen we discussed earlier. It's not about shielding ourselves, it's about being brave enough to let ourselves be seen, flaws and all.
Exactly. And this naturally leads us to our next topic. If vulnerability is about being seen and embracing imperfection, what happens when that leads to rejection?
Next episode, The Art of Rejection, Facing No with Grace.
Welcome back to the Courage Habit. Last time we discussed vulnerability as a profound strength.
Today, we're tackling a topic many find even more daunting, the art of rejection. Just saying the word can send a shiver down your spine. Can it, Alex? It's something we all experience, yet it feels so deeply personal and often incredibly painful. This universal fear can really hold us back.
Absolutely, Lisa. And that's precisely why it's such a crucial part of building our courage habit. Think about it. How many times have you not applied for that job, not pitched that idea, or not asked someone out, simply because you were afraid of hearing no? That fear of rejection can be a powerful barrier.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. We avoid the potential pain by not trying, and therefore, we miss out on potential success, and our courage never gets stretched.
Exactly. So, today we're going to equip you with practical strategies to face rejection head on. We'll look at the psychology behind why it stings so much, and more importantly, how to decouple your self-worth from those external no's. We'll see how to reframe rejection as valuable feedback, and I'll also share some techniques for developing that inner resilience.
And I'll be sharing a personal story about a significant rejection I faced and how I learned to navigate it. So let's get into it. Alex, why does rejection feel so incredibly awful? Is it just in our heads?
It's deeply rooted in our psychology, Lisa. Humans are inherently social creatures. For most of our evolutionary history, being accepted by the group was vital for survival. Rejection, back then, could literally mean being cast out and facing danger alone. So, our brains are wired to interpret rejection as a threat. This triggers a powerful emotional response, often including feelings of shame, inadequacy, and a sense of not being good enough. It taps into that primal fear of not belonging.
That makes so much sense. It's not just a simple no, it's a perceived threat to our belonging. So when we hear no, our ancient brain goes into overdrive.
Precisely. And in modern life, this often manifests as tying our self-worth to external validation. We get a job offer and we feel valuable. We get a promotion and we feel accomplished. Conversely, when we're rejected, it can feel like a direct hit to our identity. We start to question our abilities, our worth, our very essence.
This is where we need to actively retrain our brains, right? How do we begin to decouple our self-worth from that external feedback, especially the negative kind?
The first step is awareness, and then it's about conscious reframing. Start by recognizing that a rejection is an event, not a definition of who you are. When you receive a rejection, resist the urge to immediately think, I'm a failure, or I'm not good enough. Instead, try to pause and take a breath.
So, create a little space between the rejection and our emotional reaction.
Exactly. And within that space, we can begin to ask different questions. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Which is a fixed, negative question, ask, what can I learn from this? This shifts your focus from self-blame to a growth mindset. Rejection is often rich with feedback. Perhaps the timing wasn't right. Perhaps you weren't presenting your strongest case. Or perhaps the opportunity wasn't the perfect fit to begin with.
That's a powerful reframing. So, it's about looking at it as data, like a scientist gathering information.
Think of it like this. Imagine you're baking a cake, and it doesn't turn out quite right. You don't throw away your oven and declare yourself a terrible person. You analyze what might have gone wrong. Was the temperature off? Too much flour? Rejection is your baking experiment. The no is just a result that tells you something about the process.
I love that analogy. It makes it feel less personal, more analytical. What are some specific techniques for extracting that feedback, Alex?
One effective technique is to identify the specific reason for the rejection, if possible. If it's a job application, could you ask for feedback? In other situations, the feedback might be more subtle. You might notice patterns in your interactions. Did you over-explain yourself? Were you too hesitant? Once you have a clearer idea, you can identify specific areas for improvement.
And this is where courage really comes into play because asking for feedback can also feel vulnerable and potentially lead to more criticism.
It certainly can, but that's where we build resilience. Remember when we talked about vulnerability? Asking for feedback, even if it's difficult to hear, is an act of courage. It shows you're committed to growth. Another strategy is to focus on what you can control. You can't control someone else's decision, but you can control your preparation, your presentation, and your attitude.
So, if a job application is rejected, I can't control them choosing someone else, but I can control how well I prepare for the interview or how I refine my resume.
Precisely. And it's also vital to celebrate small victories along the way. Did you put yourself out there despite the fear? Did you ask for that feedback? Did you try again after a setback? Those are all wins, and they build momentum. It's not just about the big yes. It's about acknowledging the courageous steps you took in the face of potential no.
Now, Alex, you mentioned you have a personal story about navigating a significant rejection. Please share it. It would be so helpful for our listeners to hear a real-world example.
I'd be happy to. A few years ago, I poured my heart and soul into developing a project I was incredibly passionate about. I believed in it deeply, and I had an opportunity to pitch it to a potential major investor. I prepared for weeks, thinking this was the moment. I remember standing in front of them, feeling a mixture of excitement and sheer terror. I delivered my pitch, and the response was a resounding no. Not just a polite no, but a dismissive one that implied it was a foolish idea.
Oh, Alex, that sounds devastating.
It felt like it. For about 48 hours, I wallowed. I questioned everything. Was I delusional? Was this project a complete waste of time? I felt that sting of rejection so acutely. My self-worth plummeted.
What was the turning point for you?
The turning point came when I remembered what we're talking about today, framing it as feedback. I forced myself to step back from the emotional fallout and ask, okay, what can I learn? I realized that while my passion was genuine, my understanding of that particular investor's needs and market was perhaps not as deep as it should have been. I hadn't tailored the pitch specifically enough to their interests and their pain points.
So, it wasn't that your idea was bad, but that it wasn't the right fit for that specific audience at that moment.
Exactly. I also realized I had placed an unrealistic amount of pressure on that single pitch. I had, in essence, handed them the power to define my project's worth. So, I decided to recenter. I revisited my project plan, did more market research, and started exploring other avenues, smaller investors, crowdfunding. It took longer, and there were other rejections along the way, but eventually, with a refined approach and a more resilient mindset, I found the right support.
That's such a powerful testament to resilience. It wasn't the end for you. It was a detour and a chance to learn and grow.
And that's the essence of embracing rejection with grace. It's understanding that a no rarely signifies your ultimate failure. It's often a signal for a different path, a chance to refine your approach, or simply an indication that this particular opportunity wasn't the right one. It's about developing the inner strength to hear no and still believe in your ability to pursue a yes, whether it's from someone else or, more importantly, from yourself.
So, to recap what we've discussed, rejection stings because it taps into our primal need for belonging and can lead us to tie our self-worth to external validation. To face it with grace, we need to, first, recognize that rejection is an event, not a definition of who we are. Second, create space between the rejection and our emotional reaction. Third, reframe rejection as a source of valuable feedback, asking, what can I learn? Instead of what's wrong with me? Fourth, focus on what you can control, your preparation and your attitude. And finally, celebrate the courageous steps you take, even in the face of potential no's.
That's a perfect summary, Lisa. By practicing these strategies, we can transform rejection from a paralyzing force into a catalyst for growth. We learn to see it not as an endpoint, but as a redirection, guiding us towards our next opportunity. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to The Courage Habit. Last time, we explored navigating rejection and facing a no with grace. Now, we're diving into expanding your horizon by challenging your comfort zone.
That's right, Alex. It sounds a bit daunting, doesn't it? The comfort zone. It's that cozy, familiar place where we feel safe and in control. But true growth, and therefore true courage, often lies just beyond those familiar borders.
Exactly, Lisa. Think of your comfort zone like a small, well-worn path. It's easy to walk because you know every twist and turn. But if you only ever walk that one path, you miss out on the incredible scenery, the new discoveries, the richness of the entire landscape. Expanding your horizon is about venturing off that familiar path, carefully and intentionally, to discover what else is out there.
So, it's not about throwing ourselves into overwhelming, terrifying situations. It's more about a gradual, strategic exploration.
Precisely. And this is where we can really apply the principles we've discussed before, like the exposure hierarchy and the power of the tiny step. Remember the exposure hierarchy? We talked about breaking down fears into manageable steps, from least scary to most scary. Expanding your comfort zone utilizes that same tiered approach. You identify something that feels just outside your current comfort, and you make that your next small step.
So, instead of trying to do the big, scary thing all at once, we identify the slightly less scary version of it. For example, if public speaking is a fear, the big, scary thing might be giving a keynote at a major conference. A step on the exposure hierarchy, and also a step to expand the comfort zone, might be speaking up once in a small team meeting.
Perfect analogy. And that seemingly small step is a form of what's called progressive desensitization. It's a term for getting used to something by gradually exposing yourself to it. Each time you take a tiny step outside your comfort zone, and it goes okay, your brain recalibrates. It learns that this new experience isn't as threatening as it initially seemed. Your comfort zone actually expands to include this new experience.
That's so empowering. It means our comfort zone isn't a fixed, rigid boundary. It's fluid and can be reshaped. And those tiny steps, the micro courages we talked about, are the tools for reshaping it.
Absolutely. Let's consider an example. Perhaps your comfort zone feels limited to sticking to your usual routine. You get up, go to work, come home, eat the same few meals, watch the same shows. That's comfortable, predictable. But to expand your horizon, you might decide to try a new recipe for dinner. That's a small step outside the culinary comfort zone.
And what if I'm nervous about trying new foods or a new cuisine?
That's a great question. You would apply the same principles. Your first step might be to simply look up recipes for a type of cuisine you've never tried. That's just information gathering, very low risk. Then you might decide to buy one new ingredient for that cuisine. The next step could be trying a pre-made dish from that cuisine at a restaurant. And eventually, you might work up to making a whole meal yourself. Each of those is a tiny step that expands your comfort zone around food and trying new things.
I love that. It makes it feel so achievable. It's all about progression then, and celebrating those small victories, right? Because if we only focus on the big goal, we might get discouraged.
You've hit on a crucial point, Lisa. Celebrating small wins is vital. When you take that small step, when you try that new recipe or speak up in that meeting, acknowledge yourself. Pat yourself on the back. Recognize that you did something that felt slightly uncomfortable and you navigated it. This positive reinforcement is incredibly powerful. It tells your brain that wasn't so bad. In fact, it was good. We could do more of that.
So, the process is about intentionally seeking out those edges of our comfort, not just waiting for them to appear, but actively looking for opportunities to stretch.
Yes, and this can apply to so many areas of life. Maybe your comfort zone is about socializing. You tend to stick with your close friends. Expanding that might mean striking up a conversation with a new colleague at work or attending a workshop on a topic you're interested in, even if you don't know anyone there.
And what if going to that workshop feels like a huge leap? What's a smaller step for that?
The smallest step might be researching local workshops. Then it could be signing up for one that seems particularly engaging. The step after that might be simply arriving a little early and introducing yourself to the person next to you. Each of these is a contained challenge that doesn't overwhelm, but pushes you gently. Remember, it's about finding that sweet spot, uncomfortable enough to promote growth, but not so overwhelming that it triggers complete shutdown.
It's like going to the gym and incrementally increasing the weight you lift. You don't jump from lifting 10 pounds to 200 pounds overnight. You add a little bit more each week, allowing your muscles to adapt and get stronger. Our courage muscles work the same way.
That's a fantastic physical analogy, Lisa. And crucial to remember is that setbacks can happen. You might try something, and it might not go as smoothly as you hoped. But that's not a failure to expand your comfort zone. It's simply part of the learning process. If the weight is too heavy one day at the gym, you don't quit lifting weights. You adjust. You might go back to a lighter weight for a while, or focus on strengthening different muscles. The same applies here.
So, when we encounter a setback, we can revisit what we learned from it. What was challenging? What could be adjusted? And then perhaps take an even smaller step.
Exactly. This isn't about perfection. It's about progress. It's about embracing the idea that growth happens at the edges. By consciously and gradually expanding our comfort zones, we aren't just becoming braver. We're also opening ourselves up to new experiences, new skills, new relationships, and a richer, more fulfilling life. We're essentially saying yes to more of what life has to offer.
It sounds like a continuous practice, not a one-time event, but a way of living, actively seeking those moments of gentle challenge, celebrating the small steps, and learning from every experience.
That's the habit of courage in action. By consistently and intentionally stepping beyond what's familiar, we build resilience, confidence, and a broader perspective. We discover capabilities we never knew we had simply by daring to explore what lies outside our current horizon. We're not just changing our boundaries, we're changing ourselves for the better.
And that's a powerful way to live. So, to recap, expanding your horizon means intentionally pushing the boundaries of your comfort zone. We use the principles of the exposure hierarchy and microcourage to take small, manageable steps. Each successful step desensitizes us and allows our comfort zone to expand. Celebrating these small victories is key, and setbacks are simply opportunities to learn and adjust our approach.
This is what makes life exciting and leads to genuine personal growth. Our topic for the next episode is the incredible power of our internal conversations. Happy learning! Welcome back. Last time, we explored the importance of stepping outside our comfort zones. Now, let's tackle something that happens entirely within us, our inner dialogue.
That's such a crucial point, Alex. We can plan all the exposure steps in the world, but if our own thoughts are constantly telling us we can't do it, we're going to struggle. It's like trying to run a race with weights tied to your ankles, and those weights are our negative self-talk.
Exactly, Lisa. Think about it. What's the very first thing that happens when you consider doing something a little scary? Often, it's that inner voice chiming in, isn't it? It might be a full-blown panic about what could go wrong, or just a subtle whisper of doubt. This inner dialogue, our self-talk, is incredibly powerful.
And it's not always conscious either. Sometimes these negative thought patterns are so ingrained, we don't even realize we're having them. It's just our automatic response.
That's the key, that automatic response. We need to learn to interrupt it. This episode is all about mastering courageous self-talk. We'll talk about identifying those unhelpful thoughts and replacing them with words that empower us, that encourage us to take action, even when fear is present.
So, where do we start with identifying this inner dialogue? It feels a bit like trying to catch smoke.
A great starting point is awareness. The next time you feel a pang of fear or hesitation before trying something new or facing a challenge, just pause for a moment. What thoughts are running through your head? Are they focusing on potential failures? Are they emphasizing your perceived shortcomings? Are they predicting the worst possible outcome?
So, if I'm about to give a presentation and I find myself thinking, I'm going to freeze up, everyone will think I'm an idiot, that's the negative self-talk we're talking about.
Precisely. That's catastrophic thinking. You're jumping straight to the most extreme negative outcome without any evidence. And the science behind this is fascinating. Our thoughts aren't just abstract ideas. They trigger real physiological responses. When you think, I'm going to freeze up, your body might actually start to prepare for that, releasing stress hormones. That feeling of anxiety then reinforces the thought, creating a cycle.
That makes so much sense. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, once we've identified these negative thoughts, what's the courageous alternative? how do we flip the script?
The goal is to replace them with courageous self-talk. This doesn't mean stuffing down your fear or pretending it doesn't exist. It means acknowledging the fear, then choosing to focus on your capabilities and the possibility of a positive outcome, or at least a manageable one. For that presentation example, instead of, I'm going to freeze up, you might say something like, I'm feeling nervous, and that's okay. I've prepared, and I could deliver this information. If I stumble, I can recover.
I like that. It acknowledges the feeling, the nervousness, but then pivots to action and capability. It's not about eliminating fear, but about acting alongside it. This is where reframing catastrophic thinking comes in. Instead of asking, what if X goes wrong? We can ask, what's the most likely outcome? Or, if X does go wrong, how will I handle it?
Exactly. Reframing is a powerful tool. It's about shifting your focus from the potential disaster to the reality of your preparation and your resilience. Think of your inner dialogue as a coach. Do you want a coach who constantly tells you you're going to fail, or one who reminds you of your training and encourages you to do your best?
Definitely, the encouraging coach. So, are affirmations the only way to go? Like saying, I am brave, over and over?
Affirmations can be part of it, but they need to feel believable for you to truly benefit. For many people, overly positive affirmations can feel hollow if they don't align with their current reality. Courageous self-talk is often more practical, more actionable. It's about encouragement and strategy. For instance, if your fear of failure is intense, instead of saying, I will succeed, a more courageous self-talk might be, I will focus on the next small step. I will learn from this experience, whatever the outcome.
That feels more grounded. So, we're identifying the negative, reframing the catastrophic, and then replacing it with either realistic encouragement or an action oriented mantra. Are there specific techniques for this?
Yes, one technique is called thought stopping. When you catch yourself spiraling into negative thoughts, you can mentally say, stop. This interrupts the pattern. Then, immediately, you consciously introduce a positive or neutral thought. It takes practice, but it can be very effective in breaking the cycle.
Interrupting the cycle. I can see how that would work. It's like hitting the pause button. What else?
Another approach is to personify your fear or your inner critic. Give it a name. When you hear phrases like, you're not good enough, you can recognize it as coming from Grumpy Gary, your inner critic, and then respond with your own voice. Thanks for your input, Grumpy Gary, but I'm going to try anyway. This creates a bit of detachment. It helps you see that the critical voice isn't necessarily you.
That's quite clever. It separates the thought from your identity. So, it's not, I am not good enough, but Grumpy Gary is telling me I'm not good enough.
Exactly. And then you can counter it with your own empowering self-talk. It could be a reminder of past successes. Remember that time you handled X? You can handle this too. Or it could be a declaration of your intention. My intention is to learn and grow from this experience.
This is so practical. It's not just theory, it's about actionable steps we can take every day. And it ties back to the idea of courage not being the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Our inner dialogue is a huge factor in that willingness.
Absolutely. Our thoughts are the fuel for our actions. If we're filling our tank with doubt and fear, we're not going to get very far. But if we're fueling it with encouragement, with belief in our ability to cope and learn, we can move mountains. This practice of mastering courageous self-talk is fundamental to building the courage habit. It's an ongoing process, a skill to be honed.
So, to recap for our listeners, first, awareness is key. Intentionally listen to your inner dialogue. What are those automatic thoughts telling you? Second, identify negative or catastrophic thinking. Are you predicting doom? Third, reframe by asking yourself more realistic questions about outcomes and your ability to cope. And finally, replace negative self talk with encouraging, actionable, and believable statements.
That's a perfect summary, Lisa. Cultivating courageous self-talk isn't about being overly optimistic or dishonest with yourself. It's about choosing the thoughts that support your growth and your willingness to step forward, even when it feels uncomfortable. It's about becoming your own most consistent, encouraging ally.
And that ally is a powerful one to have in your corner as you continue to build your courage.
Indeed. Next episode, Cultivating an Action Bias, focusing on the courage to simply start. Welcome back to the Courage Habit. We're focusing on something that trips so many of us up, the paralysis that strikes when we have a goal but struggle to actually begin.
That analysis paralysis Alex is talking about. It's so real, isn't it? You have this big task or dream, and you think about it and think about it and research it and plan it, but you never actually do it. It's like standing at the edge of a diving board, overthinking the jump so much that you just stay there.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of an action bias comes in. It's not about being reckless or jumping in without any thought. Instead, it's about developing a mental leaning towards doing rather than just thinking. It's about understanding that perfect timing or perfect preparation is often an illusion, and that momentum is far more valuable than perfect stillness.
So, it's about accepting that the first step might be imperfect, and that's okay. It's about prioritizing movement over getting everything just right before you even begin. Because if we wait for everything to be perfect, we might end up waiting forever.
Precisely. Think about it like learning to ride a bike. You don't sit there and calculate the exact angle of the handlebars, the precise pressure on the pedals, or the perfect trajectory before you push off. You wobble, you might even fall a little, but you keep pedaling. That small, imperfect movement creates the balance and momentum needed to actually ride. That's action bias in its purest form.
I love that analogy. It makes it so much clearer. So, how do we cultivate this action bias in our own lives, especially when we're facing something that feels overwhelming? What are some practical ways to overcome that initial inertia?
One of the most powerful tools is what we touched on earlier, the tiny step. Remember the concept of micro courage? It's about breaking down that big, daunting task into the smallest possible actionable units. If your goal is to write a book, the tiniest step might be opening a document and writing a single sentence, or even just deciding on the title. The goal isn't to write the whole book in that moment, but to simply start the act of writing.
That makes sense. It lowers the barrier to entry so dramatically. It's not, I have to write a chapter. It's just, I have to write one sentence. And once you've written that sentence, the next sentence feels a little less impossible.
Right? And this leads to another key strategy, setting an arbitrary deadline for starting. Not for finishing, but for starting. For example, I will begin working on that report at 2 p.m. today, no matter what. This forces you to confront the procrastination head on. It's about consciously deciding to act, rather than waiting for inspiration or a magical moment to strike.
I can see how that creates accountability. It's a commitment to yourself to just engage with the task, even if it's only for a short period initially. It's like priming the engine, even if you're not ready to hit the highway. You just need to get it running.
And when you're in that starting phase, be kind to yourself about the outcome. The goal right now isn't mastery or perfection. It's completion of the first step. If you're learning a new skill, your first attempts will be clumsy. That's normal. The action bias tells us that engaging in that clumsy action is more beneficial than remaining disengaged and perfecting your phantom practice.
So, we're shifting the focus from the quality of the initial action to the act of taking action itself. It's about building the habit of starting. You mentioned that perfection is often an illusion. What do you mean by that in this context?
We often imagine this perfect scenario where we'll have all the facts, all the time, all the energy, and perfect clarity before we begin. But in reality, most significant achievements are the result of iterative progress. You act, you learn from the result, you adjust, and you act again. The perfect outcome is usually born from a series of imperfect beginnings. If you're trying to build a garden, you don't wait for the perfect soil, the perfect tools, the perfect weather. You start digging, you plant a seed, and then you learn to nurture it as it grows.
That really reframes it. It's not about waiting to be ready, but about using the act of starting as the catalyst for becoming ready. It's a proactive approach to growth. What about the fear that we might be making a mistake by starting too soon?
That's a valid concern, and it's where courage truly comes into play. The courage to start is often the courage to accept that you might not have all the answers. It's the courage to be vulnerable to the outcome, whatever it may be. But consider the alternative, the regret of never having tried at all. Often, the fear of failure is far worse than the actual experience of failure. And by taking that initial step, even if it's small, you're already confronting and diminishing that fear.
So, by acting, we gather data. We learn what works, what doesn't, and what adjustments are needed. This feedback loop is crucial for growth, and it can only happen once we've moved past the point of inaction.
Exactly. And as you consistently practice this action bias, you'll notice a shift. Tasks that once felt insurmountable will begin to feel manageable simply because you've developed the muscle memory for starting. It's like any other habit. The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
So, to recap for our listeners, cultivating an action bias means leaning towards doing rather than just thinking. It's about understanding that perfect preparation is often the enemy of progress. We can achieve this by breaking down tasks into tiny, actionable steps, setting arbitrary deadlines for starting, accepting imperfect initial attempts, and reframing the goal from perfect outcome to the act of beginning.
And remember, the courage to start is the courage to embrace uncertainty and learn as you go. It's about realizing that momentum is a powerful force, and that taking an imperfect step forward is almost always more courageous and productive than standing still.
That's a fantastic takeaway. The courage to simply begin. It's a powerful idea, and I think it directly combats that feeling of being stuck. It's about choosing motion over inertia.
Absolutely. Next episode, inspired by stories, everyday acts of bravery. Welcome back. Last time we explored cultivating an action bias, that crucial courage to simply start. Today we're going to discuss everyday acts of bravery.
I love this topic, Alex. We often think of bravery as grand gestures, like a firefighter rushing into a burning building. But courage, the kind we're building a habit of, is often much quieter, much more personal. It's about those moments when we push ourselves, even just a little, despite feeling that familiar knot of fear.
Exactly, Lisa. And today we're going to share some stories that illustrate this beautifully. These are tales of ordinary people facing their own challenges head on. Think about Sarah, for instance. Sarah has always had a crippling fear of public speaking. Just the thought of standing in front of a small group would make her hands shake and her mind go blank. She works in a marketing role where presenting her team's ideas is becoming increasingly important.
Oh, I can feel her anxiety. That's such a common fear, isn't it? The fear of judgment, of making a mistake, of simply not being good enough. So what did Sarah do?
Sarah decided she couldn't let this fear hold her back any longer. She remembered our discussion about building up to uncomfortable situations gradually. She didn't sign up for a grand presentation immediately. Instead, she started small. She committed to asking one question in every team meeting. Just one. Initially, it felt monumental. Her heart would race. But she'd managed to blurt out her question, often before she could second-guess herself too much.
That's such a perfect example of the tiny step, isn't it? Building that courage muscle by proving to yourself that you can do it, even on a small scale. What happened next for Sarah?
She repeated this for weeks. Then, she started answering questions directed at her. The next step was offering a brief comment on someone else's idea. Each small success built on the last. Eventually, she volunteered to present a small segment of a project update to her immediate team. It wasn't the entire presentation, just a few slides. And guess what? She did it. She still felt nervous, but she managed it. She found her voice.
That's so inspiring. It shows that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. And that action, those tiny steps, create a positive feedback loop. It makes the next step, however slightly larger, feel a little more achievable.
Precisely. Now, let's consider another story, this time about someone named David. David dreamed of starting his own small bakery. He had a passion for baking and incredible recipes passed down from his grandmother. However, he was working in a stable, well-paying corporate job. The idea of leaving that security to pursue an uncertain passion felt terrifying. He worried about financial instability, about failure, about disappointing his family.
That's the comfort zone challenge in action, isn't it? The familiar safety of the known versus the potential rewards and risks of the unknown. It takes real courage to even consider stepping out of that established comfort.
It does. David did something incredibly courageous. He didn't quit his job immediately. Instead, he started baking on weekends. He'd sell his bread and pastries at a local farmer's market. This was his way of testing the waters, of gaining experience, and of building a small customer base without jeopardizing his main income. He faced rejection when some market days weren't as successful, and he had to learn to manage his time effectively between his job and his passion project.
So, he was consciously exposing himself to the possibility of failure, but in a controlled environment. That's such a smart way to build confidence. What was the outcome for David?
After about a year of consistent weekend baking and selling, David had built a loyal following and had a clear understanding of the market. He also had saved a good portion of his corporate salary. He felt ready. He took the courageous leap, resigned from his job, and opened his small bakery. It wasn't easy, of course. There were days that felt overwhelming. But because he had already practiced courage through his weekend ventures, he was better equipped to handle the challenges. His bakery is now thriving.
These stories, Sarah's and David's, perfectly capture the essence of everyday bravery. They aren't extraordinary feats, but they are monumental shifts within an individual's life. They remind us that courage is a series of conscious choices.
And that's the power of hearing these stories, Lisa. They create what I call a contagion effect. When we hear about someone else taking that step, it makes the idea of us taking a similar step feel more real, more possible. It demystifies courage. It shows us that it's not reserved for a special few. It's a human capacity that we can all cultivate.
Alex, thinking about these stories also brings to mind the courage it takes to simply be oneself. Consider Maria, who grew up in a very traditional community where certain career paths were highly encouraged and others, particularly in the arts, were seen as impractical. Maria was an incredibly talented painter, but she felt immense pressure to pursue a more conventional profession.
That's a tough spot to be in. The pressure of familial and societal expectations can be incredibly strong.
It is. But Maria found the courage to explore her passion. She started taking art classes in her evenings and weekends, like David with his baking. She didn't announce it to everyone at first. She nurtured this part of herself in private. Then, she began sharing her work with close friends who encouraged her. Eventually, she had a small exhibition at a local community center. The courage wasn't just in painting, it was in allowing herself to be seen, to be vulnerable with her art, and to pursue something that wasn't the expected path.
And what a powerful act of self-definition that is. It's standing firmly in your own truth, even when others might not understand or approve. It's a quieter form of bravery, perhaps, but no less significant. It's the courage to honor your own authentic self.
Absolutely. So, as we reflect on these stories, Sarah overcoming her fear of public speaking with tiny steps, David bravely transitioning to his dream bakery by testing the waters, and Maria finding the courage to pursue her artistic passion despite external pressures. What's the takeaway for our listeners?
The takeaway is that you are surrounded by and capable of extraordinary everyday bravery. These aren't tales of superheroes, but of relatable individuals who chose to act despite their fears. Their stories are proof that the courage habit is achievable. Each small step, each brave decision builds momentum. They've shown that courage isn't about being fearless, but about facing your fears and taking action anyway. These everyday acts of bravery are the foundation of a courageous life.
And by hearing these stories, we can find inspiration and validation for our own courageous journeys. We can see ourselves in their struggles and their triumphs. It reinforces that the capacity for courage lives within each of us, waiting to be activated through consistent practice.
Indeed, these acts, small or large, weave a tapestry of resilience and determination. They show us the path forward. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to the Courage Habit. Today, we're tackling something really important. What happens when the going gets tough? We've talked about building courage and facing our fears, but this journey isn't always a straight line. There will be bumps, detours, and maybe even times you feel like you've slid backward.
That's right, Alex. It's easy to feel like you're making great progress, and then life throws you a curveball. Suddenly, that courage habit feels a lot harder to maintain. Today, we're going to talk about navigating those obstacles, those setbacks and plateaus that can really test our resolve.
Exactly. So let's start with setbacks. What is a setback in the context of building courage? Think of it as an instance where you didn't take the action you intended, where you did try, and it didn't go as planned. Maybe you wanted to speak up in a meeting, and the words just wouldn't come out. Or perhaps you tried a new social event, and it felt more awkward than you hoped.
And for someone who's been building up to that, a setback can feel like a huge failure, right? It's easy to start thinking, see, I knew I couldn't do it. This whole courage habit thing isn't for me.
Absolutely. That's the trap. But here's the key. A setback is not a sign that you're back to square one. It's a data point. It's feedback. Remember when we talked about the exposure hierarchy? A setback often means that the step you were attempting was just a little too big, or maybe the timing wasn't quite right. It doesn't negate all the progress you've made.
So, instead of viewing it as I failed, we should reframe it as this particular step didn't work out as expected. What can I learn from it?
Precisely. The first step in overcoming a setback is to acknowledge it without judgment. Don't beat yourself up. Just observe. What happened? What were you feeling before, during, and after? What specifically made a setback? Was it the exact task, the environment, your internal state?
That's a great point. So if I wanted to speak up in a meeting and froze, I should analyze why I froze. Was it the topic? Was I worried about what others would think? Was I just not prepared enough?
Exactly. And once you have that information, you can adjust. Maybe you need to break that speaking up goal into smaller pieces. For instance, instead of aiming to make a full point, perhaps the next goal is to simply ask a clarifying question. Or maybe you need to practice that specific point beforehand. Think of it like training for a race. If you try to run a marathon without training, you're going to hit a wall. A setback tells you need to adjust your training plan.
And what about plateaus? Those aren't necessarily setbacks, but they can feel just as frustrating. It's when you feel like you're doing all the right things, but you're just stuck. No more progress.
Plateaus are incredibly common, and they can be signals that it's time to reassess or push a little differently. Imagine climbing a mountain. You push hard, you gain altitude, and then you reach a ledge where the terrain is mostly flat for a while. You're still moving, but the rapid ascent has paused.
So, what do you do on that ledge? Just wait.
Well, you can use that time strategically. First, recognize that plateaus are normal. They often happen after periods of intense growth. Your system, whether it's your body during physical training or your courage muscle, needs time to consolidate those gains. It's a sign of adaptation,
That's reassuring to hear. It's not that something is wrong.
right? So, On a plateau, you can do a few things. One is to continue with your current practices, trusting that you're still strengthening your foundation. Another is to slightly increase the challenge in ways that still feel manageable, but push you just past your current comfort zone. This is where recalibrating your exposure hierarchy becomes really useful.
Can you give us an example of recalibrating?
Sure, let's say you've been consistently giving presentations to small groups of 3 people, and you feel like you've plateaued. You can now do it without much anxiety, but you're just comfortable. To break through, you might try one of these. Increase the group size to 4 or 5. Or keep the group size the same, but introduce a new element, like presenting on a slightly more challenging topic, or inviting someone you don't know well to observe.
So it's about adding a small, new variable to create a little bit of that necessary discomfort again.
Exactly. It's not about making a giant leap, but about strategically introducing a new element of challenge. And sometimes during a plateau, you might also experience fear fatigue. This is when the constant effort to push past your comfort zone starts to feel exhausting.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that. It's like your fear response system is just tired. You're always on alert, and it takes a toll.
Yes, fear fatigue is real. When you feel it, it's important to give yourself permission to dial things back for a moment without seeing it as a failure. This doesn't mean abandoning your goals. It means practicing strategic rest and recovery. Think of it as letting your courage muscle heal. This might mean engaging in activities that are genuinely comfortable and restorative for you. Perhaps spending time in nature, listening to calming music, or engaging in a hobby you love.
So, it's about actively recharging your courage reserves. And then, when you've had that rest, you can look at your exposure hierarchy again.
Precisely. You've rested, you've recharged, and now you can reevaluate. Are the steps you've been attempting still feeling overwhelming? Perhaps the plateau was a sign that you needed that break, and now a slightly adjusted step will be manageable. Or maybe you need to go back to a slightly easier step for a short while to rebuild confidence before trying a larger one again.
It sounds like a lot of this comes down to self awareness and a willingness to be flexible. Not being rigidly attached to a plan, but being responsive to how you're actually feeling and performing.
That's the essence of it, Lisa. Building courage is a dynamic process. Setbacks provide information. Plateaus are opportunities to consolidate or strategically adjust. And fear fatigue is a signal for recovery and reevaluation. The key is to view these moments not as roadblocks, but as integral parts of the learning process, just like a sculptor chipping away at stone. Every chip, every pause, is part of shaping the final piece.
So, to recap for our listeners, setbacks are not failures, but feedback leading to adjustments. Plateaus signal a need to consolidate or slightly increase challenge. And fear fatigue is a call for strategic rest and recovery before re-engaging. It's all about perseverance and adapting your approach.
That's beautifully put. Remember, the habit of courage is built by showing up, learning from every experience, and adjusting your course as needed. We're in this for the long haul, and navigating these challenges is precisely what makes the habit strong.
Next episode, we'll be exploring the powerful ripple effect of your courage in relationships and community.
Welcome back. We're exploring the ripple effect of courage to relationships and community.
It's such an important point, Alex. We spend so much time focusing on our personal courage, battling our own fears, and it's easy to forget that our actions don't just happen in a vacuum. They have consequences, and those consequences can be incredibly positive.
Exactly. Think about it. When you choose to act courageously, you're not just overcoming an internal hurdle. You're also setting an example. You're showing others what's possible, and that can be incredibly inspiring. We've talked a lot about the habit of courage, And a habit is something that becomes ingrained. When you live courageously, that becomes your normal, and that normality can be contagious.
Contagious in a good way, right? Like when you see someone speak up in a meeting, even when it's difficult, it makes it a little easier for someone else to speak up the next time. Or when you have a difficult but necessary conversation with a loved one.
Precisely. Let's start with relationships. How does courage manifest in our personal connections? One of the most powerful ways is through vulnerability. We've touched on this before, but it's worth reinforcing, especially in the context of relationships.
Right. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the willingness to show up and be seen, even when there's no guarantee of a positive outcome. In relationships, this means being honest about your feelings, admitting when you're wrong, or sharing your fears. It takes courage to be that open.
And when you open up that way, you invite the other person to do the same. It creates a space of trust and intimacy. Imagine a relationship where both people are constantly holding back, afraid to express their true selves. It would be superficial, right? But when courage allows for vulnerability, those relationships deepen. You build a stronger, more resilient bond.
It's like building a bridge. You have to take the first step, extend yourself, and hope the other person meets you halfway. If you're both too afraid to build, the bridge never gets made.
I love that analogy. And it's not just about personal relationships. Think about your workplace. Courageous conversations are vital for a healthy team environment. This means speaking up when you see something isn't right, offering constructive feedback, or respectfully disagreeing with a superior.
Those are the conversations most people avoid. They're easier to let slide, to just go along to get along. But that's often where the real problems start to fester.
That's true. And when you do have those courageous conversations, you're not only addressing an immediate issue, but you're also shaping the culture of your workplace. You're telling others that it's okay to be honest, that their input is valued, and that ethical behavior is important.
So, it's not just about fixing a problem, it's about proactively building a better foundation. This relates to standing up to injustice, doesn't it? We've seen so many examples throughout history where one person's courage sparked a movement.
Absolutely. Think about the civil rights movement or any movement for social change. It started with individuals who were brave enough to say enough is enough. They faced immense opposition, fear, and danger, but their courage inspired countless others to join them. Their initial act was a single spark, but it ignited a fire.
And that fire can spread. When you see someone else take a stand, whether it's for a local issue or a global one, it empowers you. It reinforces the idea that collective action, fueled by individual courage, can create meaningful change.
It's that ripple effect in action. Your courage can empower your friends, your family, your neighbors. It can encourage someone else to try something new, to speak their mind, or to pursue a dream they thought was out of reach. It's like planting seeds of bravery.
And sometimes, Alex, that courage isn't a grand, public act. It's simply the quiet determination to keep going when things are tough. That in itself can be incredibly inspiring to those around you. Seeing someone persevere through their own challenges can give others the strength to face their own.
That's a fantastic point, Lisa. We often associate courage with big, heroic gestures, but the everyday practice of courage, the stoicism in the face of adversity, that deeply impacts those closest to us. It teaches resilience. It shows our children, our partners, our friends what it means to be strong, not in the absence of fear, but in spite of it.
So, how do we actively foster this ripple effect? Beyond just acting courageously ourselves, how can we encourage it in others?
One of the best ways is to acknowledge and celebrate courage when you see it in others. Don't let acts of bravery, big or small, go unnoticed. A simple, I saw you stand up for that, and I really admired it, can make a huge difference. It validates their effort and encourages them to continue.
That's so important. We often focus on the negative, pointing out mistakes or shortcomings. Shifting that focus to acknowledge bravery can be a powerful motivator.
And remember how we discussed the power of storytelling back in episode 12? Sharing stories of courage, both your own and those you witness, is another excellent way to spread its influence. Stories are potent because they allow people to connect emotionally and see themselves in similar situations. They make the abstract idea of courage feel tangible and relatable.
So, we're not just talking about inspiration, we're talking about actively cultivating a culture of courage around us. This means being supportive when someone takes a risk, even if they don't succeed. It means creating environments where people feel safe to be vulnerable and to speak up.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that our own growth and courage is an ongoing process. As we become more courageous, we naturally become better equipped to support and encourage that in others. Our own confident actions make us more credible when we offer advice or encouragement.
It feels like a virtuous cycle. The more courageous I become, the more I can inspire courage in others, and the more their courage, in turn, can inspire me.
Precisely. And this collective courage is what builds stronger communities. When individuals are empowered to speak out against injustice, to support one another, and to take action, communities thrive. They become more resilient, more equitable, and more vibrant.
It's a beautiful thought, Alex, that our personal journey with courage isn't just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of everyone around us. It genuinely can create positive change.
It absolutely can. So, as we move towards the end of our series, remember that your courage has a reach far beyond what you might imagine. Cultivate it in yourself and watch how its influence spreads, enriching your relationships and strengthening the fabric of your community. Next episode, Sustaining the Habit, Making Courage Automatic. Welcome back. Last time, we discussed how courage ripples through our relationships and communities. Today, we'll focus on making courage an automatic response in your life.
That's right, Alex. We've spent many episodes building up an incredible toolkit for acting despite fear. We've learned about fear itself, how to break down challenges into tiny steps, and the importance of vulnerability. But a key question is, how do we embed courage into our lives so it becomes our natural way of being, not something we have to force ourselves to do every single time?
Exactly, Lisa. That's what making courage automatic is all about. It's a shift from deliberate effort to an ingrained habit. Think about learning to drive. When you first started, every single action required intense focus. Checking mirrors, signaling, steering, braking, accelerating. It was exhausting. But with practice, those actions became second nature. You don't even think about them anymore. Your body just knows what to do.
Oh, I remember that feeling. It felt like my brain had too many tabs open. So, you're saying we want to reach that same level of unconscious competence with our courageous actions?
Precisely. The key to that is consistent, deliberate practice. We've talked about this throughout our discussions, but it's important to emphasize it again. The exposure hierarchy, the tiny steps, these aren't just for overcoming one specific fear. They're training grounds. Every time you take a manageable step towards something that makes you uncomfortable, you're strengthening that pathway in your brain for courage. You're teaching your brain, this is how we handle these situations now.
So, even small, consistent actions are the building blocks for this automatic courage. It's not about one giant leap, but many small, repeated jumps.
Absolutely. And with that consistency comes reflection. It's vital to regularly look back at your experiences, not just the times you succeeded, but also the times you felt challenged. What worked? What didn't? What did you learn about yourself in that moment? This reflective practice helps you refine your approach and understand your own patterns, making future courageous actions more intuitive.
I think that's where many people get stuck. We try something, it's hard, and we either give up or feel like a failure. But you're suggesting we view those difficult moments as data points, as learning opportunities.
Exactly. It's about cultivating an attitude of ongoing learning. Every new challenge, every setback is an opportunity to grow your courage habit. Don't see a plateau as a dead end, but as a chance to pause, reassess, and find a new angle of approach. As we've discussed, courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it, and that willingness is honed through experience.
This reminds me of how we talked about accepting rejection. When you get a no, instead of internalizing it as personal failure, you can see it as information. Maybe the timing was off, maybe the approach needed adjustment, or maybe it just wasn't the right fit. That shifts the narrative from, I'm not good enough, to, okay, what did I learn from this interaction?
That's a perfect example, Lisa. And to help with this ongoing learning and refinement, I want to introduce a simple framework for continuous self-assessment. Think of it like a regular checkup for your courage journey. First, identify what's the next small step you can take or a situation where you want to be more courageous. Second, act. Take that step, even if it's just a tiny one. Third, observe. How did it feel? What was the outcome? What thoughts and emotions came up? And finally, adapt. Based on what you observed, how can you adjust your approach for the next time?
Identify, act, observe, adapt. That's a great, memorable way to put it. It encourages us to be proactive and then to learn from our actions. It's not a passive process.
It's definitely not passive. It's about creating a feedback loop where your actions inform your learning, and your learning informs your future actions. This cycle, repeated consistently, is what transforms deliberate courage into automatic courage. It becomes less about, I must be brave, and more about this is how I am.
So it's about building a positive reinforcement cycle. The more we practice, the more we learn, the more confident we become, and the easier it becomes to act courageously in the future.
Precisely. Part of sustaining this habit is also about recognizing that there will still be moments of intense fear. Automatic doesn't mean never feeling fear again. It means that when the fear shows up, your automatic response is to acknowledge it, but then to proceed with the action you've practiced. It's like having a well-rehearsed emergency drill. When the alarm sounds, you don't freeze, you enact the plan.
And this proactive approach to building courage also helps us reframe our perception of challenges. Instead of seeing them as threats to be avoided, we can start to see them as opportunities for growth, as chances to further strengthen our courage habit.
That's a crucial mindset shift. When you've regularly practiced stepping outside your comfort zone, new challenges don't feel quite as overwhelming. They feel more like familiar territory, or at least territory you have a proven strategy to navigate. It's about developing resilience, not by avoiding difficulties, but by facing them repeatedly.
So, to recap for our listeners, making courage automatic relies on consistent practice of small, manageable steps. Regular reflection on those experiences is key, viewing setbacks as learning opportunities. We can use the identify, act, observe, adapt framework to guide this ongoing process. And ultimately, it's about reframing challenges as opportunities for growth, making courage an ingrained response rather than a conscious effort.
That's a beautiful summary, Lisa. This series has been about building the foundation for a more courageous life.
For those listening, keep practicing, keep reflecting, keep adapting. Your courage habit is a lifelong journey, and you've built an amazing start.
Next episode, The Courageous Future, Living Fearlessly, Living Fully. Welcome back to The Courage Habit. This is at episode 16, our final conversation. We've journeyed from understanding the spark of courage and unpacking fear, all the way through building our exposure hierarchies, taking tiny steps, redefining bravery, and embracing vulnerability. We've talked about rejection, stepping out of our comfort zones, and mastering our inner dialogue. We've cultivated an action bias, found inspiration in stories, navigated setbacks, and seen the ripple effect of courage in our relationships and communities. And just last time, we focused on sustaining this powerful habit.
It's been an incredible series, Alex. Looking back, it feels like we've built a comprehensive toolkit for anyone wanting to live more boldly. My biggest takeaway is that courage isn't a lack of fear, but the decision to act despite it.
Precisely, Lisa. And that's the core of what we've been exploring. Courage as a habit, a muscle that gets stronger with consistent, intentional use. We've learned that fear is a natural human response, a signal, not a stop sign. Remember how we discussed the fear spectrum? From those butterflies in your stomach to that paralyzing feeling? Understanding that spectrum helps us recognize fear for what it is, and crucially, that we don't have to let it control our decisions.
And the practical tools we've shared were so empowering. The exposure hierarchy, your ladder, was a game changer. Breaking down daunting challenges into manageable, tiny steps, that's micro courage. It's about proving to ourselves in small, consistent ways that we can handle discomfort. It's like building a bridge plank by plank to cross a wide river rather than trying to leap the whole thing at once.
Exactly. And moving away from the myth of the fearless hero, embracing the idea that true bravery often lies in vulnerability. Being willing to be seen, imperfections and all, is an act of profound courage. It's about authenticity.
That really resonated with me. And the art of rejection. Facing a no without letting it shatter our confidence. It's about understanding that a rejection isn't a reflection of our worth, but often a mismatch of needs or circumstances. Learning to absorb that without internalizing it is a huge part of living fearlessly.
And then we pushed further into expanding our horizons, challenging that comfort zone. We talked about how growth happens just beyond those familiar boundaries. It's where new learning, new experiences, and new versions of ourselves await.
The inner dialogue was another critical piece. Mastering that internal conversation, shifting from self-doubt to self-encouragement, is fundamental. It's about becoming our own best cheerleader, especially when things get tough. That courageous self-talk can be the deciding factor.
Absolutely. And that directly ties into cultivating an action bias. The courage to simply start, to take that first imperfect step, knowing that momentum will build. It's the antidote to overthinking and analysis paralysis.
I loved drawing inspiration from stories, both grand and small. Seeing everyday acts of bravery, in our friends, our family, even ourselves, reinforces the idea that courage is accessible to everyone. It's not reserved for a select few.
And when setbacks inevitably occurred, we learned how to navigate them, recognizing that plateaus and failures aren't endpoints, but part of the learning process. It's about resilience, about picking ourselves up and continuing the climb.
The ripple effect showed us how embracing courage doesn't just benefit us individually. It positively impacts our relationships, our families, and our communities. When one person acts courageously, it can inspire others to do the same. It creates a more courageous world, one interaction at a time.
And finally, we focused on making courage automatic, on sustaining the habit. This isn't a one-time fix, it's a lifelong practice. It's about integrating these principles so deeply that acting courageously becomes our default mode, our natural response.
It's truly been a holistic approach to building courage, Alex. We've covered the mindset, the emotional management, and the behavioral strategies. It feels like we've equipped listeners with everything they need to face their future with newfound bravery.
And that's our goal for this final episode, to look ahead, to envision the courageous future that awaits those who have embraced this journey. Living fearlessly isn't about the absence of fear. It's about living fully, purposefully, and authentically with fear present. It's about choosing growth over comfort, contribution over avoidance, and connection over isolation.
So, for everyone listening, this is the call to action. Continue practicing. Keep taking those tiny steps. Keep challenging your comfort zone. Keep nurturing your inner dialogue. and keep being inspired by the courage you see around you and within you.
Remember, the courage habit isn't a destination you arrive at. It's the ongoing practice of showing up for yourself and for your life, even when it's hard. It's the quiet confidence that you can handle what comes your way because you've built the resilience and the willingness to try. It's about living your values, pursuing your passions, and making a meaningful impact, not because fear is gone, but because courage is stronger.
This series has been about empowering you to embrace that strength, to trust your ability to navigate challenges, to voice your truth, and to live a life that is rich with experience and driven by purpose. Your future is waiting to be shaped by your courage.
So, step forward, embrace the unknown, learn from every experience, and know that with every choice to act despite fear, you're building a more courageous, fulfilling, and impactful future for yourself and for the world around you.
Thank you, Alex, for guiding us through this incredibly valuable series. And thank you to everyone who has joined us on this exploration of the courage habit. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has indeed. This has been the culmination of our series, The Courage Habit, Training to Act Despite Fear. Thanks for listening to the series.